Up the airy mountain, down the rushy glen, we daren't go a-hunting for fear of little men. We folk, good folk, trooping all together, green jacket, red cap, and gray cock's feather. Down along the rocky shore, some make their home. They live on crispy pancakes of yellow tide foam. Some in the reeds of the black mountain lake, with frogs for their watchdogs, all night awake. High on the hilltop, the old king sits. He is now so old and gray, he's nigh lost his wits. With a bridge of white mist, Columkill he crosses on his stately journeys, from Sleeveleague to Bosses, or going up with the music on cold starry nights, to sup with the queen of the gay northern lights. They stole little Bridget for 7 years long. When she came down again, her friends were all gone. They took her lightly back between the night and morrow. They thought that she was fast asleep, but she was dead with sorrow. They have kept her ever since deep within the lakes, on a bed of flagon leaves, watching till she wakes. By the craggy hillside through the mosses bare, they have planted thorn trees for pleasure here and there. Is any man so daring to dig up one in spite? He shall find the thornies set in his bed at night. Up the airy mountain and down the rushy glen, we daren't go a-hunting for fear of little men. We folk, good folk, trooping all together, green jacket, red cap, and gray cock's feather.
The Monster Guys podcast begins now.
Welcome to the Monster Guys podcast. As always, I'm D.C. McGannon. I'm here with C. Michael McGannon. Michael, we are talking fairies this month.
We are, jumping right from yokai into another group of wild, wacky, mischievous creatures.
And dangerous.
Very dangerous.
Many of these are very dangerous, contrary to what a lot of people believe about fairies.
You know, people think of them as these cutesy, nice, pretty things, and I will say they are very enchanting. And I think that's the kicker, is they are very enchanting. They're not like, I was telling you earlier, they're not like cave trolls. They're going to stomp out of the cave and smash you over the head. They're going to enchant you first and beguile you and win your heart over, and then that's when they strike.
And I think that also is what's so alluring about them.
It is.
They're the danger and the beauty and the danger. It's that classic magnetism of the things that we can't touch, we really want to touch.
Yeah, I mean, that sums up probably a good 75% of fairies, actually.
So we're going to get into fairies this week. We're going to talk about the women of the Faerie Mound.
Yes.
And it's going to be a very exciting conversation. We're going to talk about 3 different fairies. But first, we're going to get into a couple of other things before we get into them. First of all, you've got some allergy attack going on today. Are you okay?
I can't feel my nose anymore, or I should say I don't want to feel my nose anymore.
I mean, you're struggling over here.
It's not as bad as it looks. I just can't see out of one eye and my nose hurts.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I feel for you. I've had this thing in my ear for a month going on, and I'm hoping that's clearing up, but it's kind of like spring just woke up today all of a sudden in a really big way. Yeah. I mean, it's like I went to bed a couple nights ago and everything was still dead and brown, and then like between yesterday and today, everything has bloomed. There's grass again. There are little bunnies in our garden. We're planting our garden. So it's like spring all of a sudden has happened about a month early.
Yeah, my face wasn't ready for it either. No exaggeration or joke, I think I've gone through 2.5 boxes of Kleenex just today.
Thank you. We needed to know that.
That's not an advertisement for the tissue box either.
I guess not. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. One of the things that I'm doing right now, and I think you are as well, is we're actually sipping on our first batch of mint tea.
I was earlier. Right now I'm having Earl Grey. Yes.
You changed teas on me.
I did.
We are sipping our first batch of mint tea. Of course, every year we grow several variations of mint in what I call our magical little garden. And I think it's appropriate that we're talking about fairies and planting our little magical garden right now, but loving this tea. I'm a tea lover to begin with, but then to be able to go out in the backyard and pick the leaves and brew it and sip it without ever going to the store, I'm loving it.
Yeah, I'm waiting for our chocolate mint to grow in. I think that's my favorite.
Yeah, we'll have a big harvest of chocolate mint again, as well as the others. So enjoying the tea. Michael, what's happened this week? Anything significant? I think you and I actually shared a significant moment this week.
Yeah, I think it was probably, 1 o'clock in the morning. We were on our way home, and I was driving, and I saw this, what I thought was a bag in the road. So I slowed down just in case, and then I thought it was a cat, and that bag that turned into a cat turned into a little white fluffy dog. So
it was a strange, shape-shifting little creature running down the middle of the road.
So we stopped and tried to catch it, and it decided to run probably, another block away from us?
A block, more like half a mile. It kept on going.
I think at one point it just got tired out or something. But yeah, we saved a little Maltese puppy.
And it was about a week ago almost. Maybe not quite, but little Maltese running down the road. You could tell that it had clearly gotten out of somebody's home. Mm-hmm. 1 o'clock in the morning, so somebody was asleep, didn't know. And of course, our puppy is a Maltese. So it kind of tugged on our heartstrings even more and brought this little fella home, and he curled up with you.
Yeah, he did.
It was just like he was us. He was a part of our family, and he curls up with you. Just a sweet little puppy, well-behaved, and we probably spent a good hour circling around the neighborhoods looking for anybody that was looking for the puppy. Couldn't find anything, so we brought him home, fed him, took care of him. He curled up with you that night. The next morning, I went out for a couple hours, scouring that area again. Nothing. Brought him back home. End of the day, I made a special trip back out to that area again with our little guy, and it was kind of strange because I went through all those same neighborhoods and a couple of extra, and finally I couldn't find anybody that looked like they were looking for dogs. I saw no posters up, but I saw this woman walking out of a yard. Looked like she was walking out of her neighbor's yard, walking down the street, and I just knew that she was going to taser me or something, start hitting me with her bag or something. But I just called her over and I said, do you happen to know anybody? Because here's what happened. That little puppy, every time I would go through a certain part of this one neighborhood, it would start getting excited, jump up on the window and looking around and, tongue hanging out and waggling all over the place. It was like he knew he was at home.
Yeah, which is very familiar for us having Maltese before. So.
Yeah, so I felt like this was part of the neighborhood. So I asked this woman, I said, do you know anybody who is missing a dog or know any families around here that are looking for a lost dog? And she grabbed her chest and she's like, oh my God, I am. And of course, the dog was in the back seat with Nathaniel, and so she couldn't see him. So I'm always very suspicious, I don't want to give the dog to the wrong person. So I'm like, well, what kind of dog is it? And she's like, it's a little white Maltese male puppy, which was pretty specific to the dog that was sitting in our backseat of our Jeep, right? I'm still suspicious. So I'm like, well, what's his name? And she's like, well, his name is Casper. And so I turn to the back seat and I say, Casper. And he goes nuts. And I'm like, so is it this Casper? And he sees her and she sees him and he flies over the top of my lap to the window, straight to her. And she's like, oh my gosh. And it was funny because she's like, I was just getting ready to go get drunk and cry for the rest of the night because I couldn't find him. I've been looking for him all day. But end of the story is a good story because Casper found his home. That poor little fella was a long way from home where we found him.
Yeah, so happy ending in the
happy ending. So that was
the beginning of our week, I think.
That was the beginning of our week. So it was kind of rough because There were other things going on early the next morning, and that was very late at night. We spent out trying to look for his home, but I'm glad that only probably less than 24 hours later, we found his mommy and his home, and it's always a good thing. So kind of grew my heart 3 sizes bigger.
Yeah, and I was glad that I didn't, keep on going over the shape-shifting bag in the road.
Yes, I was very glad of that. But he was a cute little fellow, but good to be home. All right, another thing that we've got going on is last week at the end of February, during our last yokai episode, we spent an entire month talking about yokai and Japanese culture. That was a great month. Really good stuff. A lot of great interaction with people, but we announced that we were going to do a giveaway. That giveaway is Wayward Book 1 Deluxe Edition from Image Comics. Now, what we didn't announce, because we didn't know this at the time, but what we've managed to do, because we said pretty please, we got that book autographed.
Yeah.
By Jim Zub, the writer of Wayward series.
Which is pretty darn cool.
Very darn cool. We just ask that people interact with us, hang out with us, blah, blah, blah. We set all the parameters on that last episode. Long story short on that one, we just did a random generator, name picker, and we have a winner for Wayward Book 1, the Deluxe Edition. Thanks to everybody who interacted with us and hung out with us. But we are happy to announce that Carissa Swinson of New York has won our giveaway.
Congratulations, Carissa.
Congratulations.
I hope you enjoyed the yokai podcasts this month or this past month, and hopefully you enjoy picking out some of those yokai that we were talking about in the story.
Absolutely. Congratulations to you. Drop us a message somewhere. Give us an address or where you want us to send this. We'll very shortly have that in the mail to you. Again, congratulations. And I do hope that I said her name right. Carissa, if I am not, correct me, but I'm doing the best I can. I don't want to mess up your name, but congratulations on the win. Okay, Michael, let's jump into our discussion on fairies. And before we go too deep into this, let me say the poem that we had at the beginning of the podcast, prior to the intros, was a poem titled "The Fairies." Quite appropriate, don't you think?
Yeah, pretty
It was
much.
a poem. It was a poem titled "The Fairies" by William Allingham. So if you want to look that up, if you want to get a copy of that, or go find a book or something with that. That's the title and the author. Very cool little poem there.
That's her advice to you as the monster guys. Go find a book with that.
Go find a book with that. We're always encouraging you to go find a book or do some research, go deeper with the monsters that we talk about. We're excited to share this information with you, but we feel like we're just kind of opening doors and want to go deeper in the conversation, whether it's on your own or with us online somewhere.
This is research into folklore is a lifelong thing, so I don't think you ever stop learning about one particular thing. So I guess you are your gateway people into
we are your gateway drug to monsters.
Exactly.
What is? I don't know. Did I just say that? Okay. Yeah, we're your gateway. We're your gateway to monsters and things that go bump in the night. Wait, that didn't sound good either. Okay, listen.
So we're going to be summoning creatures through your radio station or your radio speakers today.
We're going to be summoning demons and okay, never mind. Listen, just the things that we talk about. Go find out more about them by yourself and have fun with them.
Summon your own demons.
Summon your own demons. No, but we enjoyed talking about monsters and unpacking mythology and folklore and creatures from around the world, and very excited this month to be diving into the topic of fairies. Let me start off this conversation with a segment from a very important book for us, another book reference for everybody. It's the Irish Fairy and Folk Tales by W.B. Yeats. And that is definitely one that I think everybody should have on their shelf, especially if they're reading or researching about fairies or the fairy folk.
Yeah, this is a book that I've kind of treasured myself for years. It's almost like a Grimm's fairy tales for Irish folklore. Yeats traveled the countryside, spoke to several people, and gathered a bunch of oral traditions throughout Ireland and I think parts of Scotland as well, and really provided a good foundation for people in the future to go back and look at some of those traditions and those stories about fairies. So it's a really great resource, and I can't recommend reading through his work enough.
Yeah, and also we'll probably reference this at some point throughout the month, but J.R.R. Tolkien did a nice essay on fairies and was heavily influenced by the stories and the mythology of the fairies for his writings.
Yes, which is kind of funny because he in turn influenced our views on some things like trolls and hobgoblins and goblins, to the point where he actually apologized later on for making a mistake on hobgoblins, but it's created some fun pop culture mixes.
Yeah, sure. And the thing about folklore and mythology and tales and monsters and everything, there are some parameters, there are some definites that historically we can point to, but I do believe, and I think we were talking about this with Zach Davison during our yokai segments last month, he was talking about the Japanese monsters and how let's have fun with them, mix them up, create some of our own, and I think along the way, no matter what culture we're from, we can always reference and show respect to the history of it all, but let's have some fun moving forward and create some of our own stories and our own creatures. You know, it's just like a kid sitting down with a pencil and a piece of paper and doodling monsters. Creates his own and has fun with it. And I think we need to do some of that as well.
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear. Sip your tea, Michael. Okay, so let me read a segment from that book, Irish Fairy and Folktales, as we open up our discussion on fairies. So in referencing fairies, he says, who are they? Fallen angels who were not good enough to be saved, nor bad enough to be lost, say the peasantry. The gods of the earth, says the Book of Armagh. The gods of pagan Ireland, says the Irish antiquarians. The Tuatha De Danann, who, when no longer worshipped and fed with offerings, dwindled away in the popular imagination, and now are only a few spans high. And they will tell you in proof that the names of fairy chiefs are the names of old Danann heroes, and the places where they especially gathered together, Danann burying places, and that the Tuatha De Danann used also to be called the Slua Shi, the fairy host, or the Macra Shi, the fairy cavalcade. And he goes on to explain that there are a few different theories on the origins of fairies in Celtic folklore. One of those that the fairies were the remnant of the deities of previous inhabitants of the land who had been conquered, and those deities shrunk down to a less intimidating size. Another theory is that the fairies were the conquered, the aboriginal inhabitants themselves, forced to live on the fringes of society, sneaking about and taking their revenge in the night in small, mischievous, annoying ways. Which is where we get a lot of our stories of their little acts in the nighttime. There's also the thought that the fairies are the personifications of the powers of nature. That's a big theme throughout fairy lore.
Throughout a lot of lore, yeah.
Yeah, throughout a lot of lore. And then there's another theory that the fairies are the spirits of the dead who live continuously in a sort of an eternal purgatory, neither in heaven nor in hell. Goes on to discuss that this concept fits with a fifth possible explanation that was brought on by Christian theologians that fairies are in fact a type of fallen angel, an order that was not good enough for heaven nor evil enough for hell. And we see that coursing through fairy lore quite a bit as well.
We do. And I think even the first, not person, but the first guest, the first guest monster on our list tonight, the Banshee, we will see a couple of different explanations of where she comes from and who she is.
Yeah.
You know, covering some of those topics that you just spoke of.
So we have fairy tales throughout history. And basically fairy tales, you know, these stories that we read about as kids growing up and look back upon, these fairy tales are basically the interactions between the world of humans and the world of fairies. And here's the thing. Most of the fairy tales that we read as kids have been rewritten so that they are palatable for us as kids. Because in reality, fairy tales don't really turn out too well for either party. So it's something to keep in mind that if you want to know the real story, you got to go back to the origin story or that origin tale, because it's going to be a lot darker and a lot bloodier most of the time.
And a lot weirder.
And a lot weirder than what we're going to get in our little golden books, chapter book.
Yeah, I don't think I ever remember reading in those little cardboard books the story of the king that raised the giant flea and skinned it and used it to create a giant furry coat.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's you're not going to get the same weird beheadings that you got in the original fairy tales.
Yeah. So let's jump into the Banshee. That's our first fairy of the evening, and she's a popular one. She's a popular figure in pop culture, in a lot of stories, in a lot of movies, in a lot of discussions, but there's been a bit of diversion.
Well, I'm glad you said
over
that,
the years.
because that's actually what I wanted to talk about first is, if you watch Scooby-Doo, I think there's an episode, probably a few episodes.
Hey, listen, I'm going to warn you right here. You better not knock Scooby-Doo.
I'm not knocking Scooby-Doo.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
In the several incarnations that have come through Scooby-Doo, I think I've seen a couple times where they have this Banshee as the villain for that episode, flying around the hallways, screaming at people, and that's not really what a Banshee is. Banshee, classically or historically, is just as disturbing, I guess, but I guess more peaceful about it. She's the woman at the river.
You just used disturbing and peaceful in the same sentence. You're going to have to reconcile that. And by the way, and by the way, people, if Michael seems like he's struggling, he is. This whole allergy attack is coming on strong. So
I may
you guys just show him some grace, give him some mercy, help him along here. While you're listening, cheer Michael on, because it's he's having trouble getting through this. So you were saying Del Toro.
Yeah, Del Toro's Pan's Labyrinth. That's peaceful yet disturbing, I would think.
Yeah, I think so. For most people it's disturbing, but...
Anyways, so you have this woman washing a funeral shroud at the river.
Well, first of all, let's go back, though. Let's really paint a picture on what the Banshee is for a lot of people today. And you referenced Scooby-Doo, but the whole idea of this creature that flies around shrieking in the night, that's what most people think the Banshee is. And that's not really what the Banshee... I mean, it is for pop culture. It is for a lot of modern stories. But historically, the fairy, the Banshee, is something a lot different.
Right. So you have that image of the woman at the river that's washing the funeral shroud. I guess maybe before you get the image, oftentimes you would hear the keening. And you and I were talking about this earlier today, and we were kind of going back and forth using different words and trying to say the same thing. You were talking about how she's known for her screeching, and I was arguing with her, you saying it's not screeching, it's keening.
Right, and I was trying to make a point that that's what a lot of people believe she does, is runs around or flies around screeching.
Right.
But keening is an interesting word and has an interesting history to it. Explain the idea or the act of keening.
Keening is fascinating to go back and look into. It is a tradition, a funeral tradition held after the funeral wake. It's when a woman or several women get together, not to get together, but they basically hold a public performance, which is a very passionate, powerful wailing. And it's very raw emotion, but it's still very poetic at the same time.
And these women a lot of time are paid. They're hired to do this.
This is part of the procession, but it's part of the, I don't want to say ritual, it's part of their older funerals, basically. So it's something that they still take a part in. It is a profession. It's something that bards used to do, and then bards kept on writing the poetic side of the keen, but women actually took up the performance. And this is something to keep in mind as well, that the audience, or not the audience, but the people at the funeral would kind of hum along with as the woman was doing this powerful wailing performance. Now, where the Banshee ties into this is kind of interesting. A lot of people, even back then, believed that the keening woman was in fact a fairy all to herself sometimes, because the women who would come in to do the keening were often very rough, purposefully. It wasn't
disheveled hair and torn clothes.
Oftentimes they would come in barefoot, and they were known for saying, that they would live off of blood, oftentimes drinking human blood. So there was a very supernatural aspect about these.
A lot of mystery. They lived on the fringes of society.
Yeah, and this was actually very purposeful, because at this wake, they were, in essence, guiding the souls on to the next stage of the afterlife. So this was a very important job, and very, again, almost shamanistic, now that I think about it. Later on, after time had passed, sadly, this tradition was kind of left behind because of Christianity moving in and the priest taking over, that part of the funeral.
Mm-hmm.
But it's actually something that's started to pick up again to this day, and that tradition is being brought back, I guess, in a way.
It's interesting because there's a lot of tribal traditions, I'm using that word very loosely, but around the world that are being brought back for funerals, for weddings, for rites of passage. There's a lot of rituals and performances that are making a comeback to really allow people to take hold of their culture and their heritage.
One Irish poet said it pretty interestingly, because to me it's always interesting that this was not necessarily a family member of the person who died that was doing this passionate wailing, but he put it this way. He said, "The grief of the keen is no personal complaint for the death of one woman over 80 years, but seems to contain the whole passionate rage that lurks somewhere in every native of the island." And it was just kind of interesting to think of that this is almost a representative of all of Ireland at this person's passing. But going back to the Banshee, this, again, because of her almost supernatural position, many people believe that, this was a fairy herself, oftentimes.
The keening woman you're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it's not too far of a stretch that when people would hear this wailing at night, they often believed that, it was an omen that somebody from an older family or an influential family had died very far away, or even sometimes, and this is where we get closer to the later idea of the fairy that we know so well now, they believed that she was foretelling the death.
That's one aspect of the Banshee that has stuck throughout time, is the wailing, that keening that you were talking about. When people hear that it was a foretelling, it was an omen. Mm-hmm. And not necessarily that she had to fly through the village 3 times or 3 nights in a row. But we go back to the image of the woman at the river. There is a story, actually. We may read this story in one of our upcoming podcasts, but there's a story talks about that woman at a tree in a field. And so it's the idea of that woman who is in mourning and wailing. And for the Banshee, it was an omen or foretelling of death.
Mm-hmm. And there are a few different ways that she shows up as well. That is the most common way. That is the Banshee, the wailing figure washing the funeral shroud. There's also the Banshee, and hopefully I'm saying that right, but this is more of the crone aspect of the Banshee, and she's a bit more vicious in her appearance. She's very old, she has one nostril, she's extremely wrinkly.
Which is kind of what you have right now with your allergy attack. You've got like one nostril thing going on there.
I don't know what I have. My nose feels like a...
You got like one nostril on one side and you got one eye on the other side. You're looking pretty cronish over there.
Yeah, I just need a hood and...
You got something going on I need to know about?
Well, I'm auditioning for the Fates. I'm going to become like one of the 3 Fates.
That'll work.
Anyways, the Banshee is, a crone also washing up the river, but her shroud is said to be not a shroud, but battle armor, and she's washing the blood from that armor. And oftentimes it's believed that if you were to see that, and I will say she was more associated heavily with battle and warriors, but if you were to see that, you were possibly going to die soon. It was believed that she was actually an aspect of an old god or goddess, whereas the Banshee is oftentimes believed to be ancestral spirit, ghost of your ancestors, warning that you're about to die or that somebody in your family is about to die. We go back to those different beliefs of what fairies are, and you've got, just in that single archetype alone, you've got everything from your dead family members to old gods.
And very powerful images, very powerful lore that still sticks with a lot of people even today in their superstitions and their beliefs and even their convictions. So, and not images to be trifled with by any means.
Not at all. As for the whole image of the gliding and the shrieking and the ghostly, creepy lady flying around.
Yeah, the Scooby-Doo Banshee.
Yeah. I mean, the Banshee was that stationary figure at the river, but she was also known for, I don't want to say mischief, because it went much deeper than mischief, but she was known for one thing in particular, aside from the wailing. She was a shapeshifter. She could appear as she wanted to, and she was known to be able to glide around. But if you were walking around and you happen to see a silver comb on the ground, you are not supposed to pick it up.
Yeah.
If you did, then...
And silver combs are are very tempting to pick up if you see it on the ground.
Well, especially back then.
Especially back then. So I know if I see a silver comb in the parking lot, it takes every ounce of resolve within me to walk away.
Man, my
And our official stance as the Monster Guys to you, listener, is if you see a silver comb, walk away.
It is very difficult. Although anybody that's been on one of our shows knows my hair gets a little wild sometimes. I'm okay not using a comb. That thing will get stuck.
So if somebody sees a silver comb back in the story, then
yeah, if you go and pick it up, then the Banshee will come and spirit you away. It's its way of entrancing you into its trap, and then it will take you and it'll kidnap you. And depending on if you're a child or if you're a woman, they'll take you to the fairy world either to raise you as one of their own or to help raise the children that they've kidnapped.
And there's a duality to the story of what happens to people when they are spirited away or when they are taken. The children, particularly, who are taken, live happy lives and are full of mirth and merriment and are well cared for. There's another side that says that they are tormented, always wanting to be back with their family. We'll get into this later, but there are specific fairies that if you're taken by one of those fairies versus another, that you're believed to either be happy or in torment or in mourning wherever you're taken.
And then, of course, you also have the Devil's Tithe.
The Devil's Tithe.
Where fairies will have to pay a tithe every 7 years to the devil for one reason or another. And this kind of ties into the whole they're fallen angels thing, and they have to do this in order so that one of their own number doesn't get taken to hell.
Right.
But that's stuff we'll get into more as the month progresses in our podcast. But yeah, so that's the whole silver cone thing. I think is important because I think we were talking about this earlier this afternoon, actually, right before the trees and the flowers decided to wage world war on my face
against you.
But yeah, we were talking about how all over the world you have, yokai that are mysterious and creepy and will make you run into invisible walls at night or just trip you and eat you. Or you have trolls in Scandinavia that just are going to come smash you over the head and eat you.
They're going to take care of their business.
Or you have werewolves that are going to eat you. Or you have vampires that are going to eat you. Typically, you just get eaten by monsters.
You get eaten by monsters everywhere you go.
But in Ireland, in Scotland, in the land of the Faerie Folk, they don't do that. They entrance you first.
Yeah, they use enchantment.
Mm-hmm.
Quite a bit.
It's an elegant monster. And just like the...
You're elegantly eaten alive.
Or kidnapped. I mean, and that's the weird...
But you kind of have to be tricked into it.
Yeah, there are a few that will just drag you down, but typically they hypnotize you or they make you steal the silver comb off the ground. It's strange when you think about it. Monster, or a way of...
Yeah.
Working for monsters.
They entrap you, they enchant you, they wait for you to make that move, and then they come eat you.
Yes.
It's almost like they're polite about it.
Yeah,
Cave troll,
going to give you a chance.
Forget it. I'm just going to destroy you. But the fairy folk, we're going to be polite about it.
Well, that is one of the things about the fairy folk that they're
very proper.
Well, I always had this hammered in my head growing up. They are mysterious. Nobody knows why they do certain things the way they do it. But moving on to the Leanan, the close cousin of the Banshee, you have another woman of the Faerie Mounds.
Woman of the Faerie Mounds. This is one of two vampiric monsters that we'll be talking about tonight.
Mm-hmm. And the vampiric aspect was actually popularized by W.B. Yeats. She would suck the life force out of the poets that she was the muse for. I guess we should take a step back and explain her. She is a fairy muse.
Right. We've talked about her just briefly in the past.
Yeah. This fairy muse will attach herself, so to speak, to a poet, an artist, or a creative of some sort, and she will provide them great artistic inspiration. So they come up with these brilliant paintings or poems or, whatever their craft is.
So basically, the Leanan, she is responsible for the 80s hair metal movement.
Probably.
Because all of 80s hair metal, of course, was responsible for all of the devil worship in the world.
Actually, I can't say that.
And they all sold their souls to the devil and made contracts. So it had to be the Leanan who came in and said, hey, I'm going to give you some great heavy metal.
Here's the trick,
if you sell your soul to me.
She's known for killing off those artists as they're young.
Well,
They're
crash
so
and burn,
brilliant.
baby, rock and roll.
Well, I don't know. Def Leppard's still going. Aerosmith's still going.
I don't know. Is Aerosmith still? Are they still standing?
Well,
that's a joke.
He's
Def Leppard's definitely
going.
What are we talking about? Def Leppard and Aerosmith in The Women of the Faerie Mound. Okay, the Leanan she was a muse for the artist.
Yes. Now her
rock you like a hurricane.
Her name actually translates to kind of the sweetheart of the Faerie Mound, but it was said that
the sweetheart.
Mm-hmm.
Of the Faerie
that's
Mound.
The thing is, they were lovers. That was the inspiration of the artist dude.
The artist dude. That's nice. I love you. Now I'm going to eat you alive.
Well, that's okay. So let's take a step back because again, she gets that image of the vampire aspect, and she is known for sucking the life force out. Historically, it was more of this guy became obsessed with her. She became his inspiration for everything. It was a matter of unhealthy love, I think. So when she would break away, or if there was a break in the relationship or anything, then he would crash and burn and just die from it. Because what she got out of it was the emotion of the human. That's what she was after.
Right.
And that's what she fed off of. Now, there's a very strange aspect to this fairy. She will put them under a gias, or a vow or a promise of some sort. And these are very specific vows or promises that, if broken by either one of them, one could become the slave to the other. So it doesn't always end in death for the guy, I guess, but typically that's what happens. If there's a vampiric aspect, it's not necessarily the blood-sucking aspect so much of the...
It's the life force. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Almost like a succubus.
Well, the life force, or if we're going back even further, just the attention and the emotion that just drags the person to the ground.
Yeah, a psychological vampire, an emotional vampire.
But she was one of the, as far as vampires go, she was one of the big inspirations for vampires, as we know today, if you go back to our vampire podcast that we talked about. But the bigger blood-sucking vampire fairy, if you will, is the Banshee.
The Banshee, but before we go on to her, because there's a lot to her, let's take a break, and we want to go to our Monster Mailbag. We have some correspondence from a listener, and we want to address that. And it has a little bit of tie-in to our fairy discussion tonight. So let's go to our Monster Mailbag.
Yes, delicious mail. I love it. Yes. Let's open the Monster Mailbag. Let's see what's inside.
This one came in from Twitter this week, the Monster Guys. If you guys want to connect with us there, we love hearing from you. This message says, "Hey guys, just started listening to your podcast and am loving the yokai casts." Those little yokai podcasts that we do every week now. Okay, I also listened to the Wendigo one, which rocked. Very cool. I'm excited about that. The Wendigo was a good one. Any chance you'll explore the monsters, creatures of Mesoamerica at some point? They are a vicious, fun bunch. Rock on. Rock on for sure. The answer to that, in short, is yes, because we do take requests and we do like to dive into regions or cultures or groupings of monsters that people want to know more about. That is a very interesting area for folklore and mythology, and it's one that we've talked about getting deep into before. So I will say yes, we are going to get into that not too far into the future, because we're going to mix that region with some other North American, Native American creatures, and so to just be a really good grouping of monsters that we dive into there. And I think we're actually going to go back to one of our musical guests who we had on not too many episodes ago, the Deer People. And we're going to talk to them because their name is actually taken from a Native American legend.
Yes, and one that actually, as well, just as coincidence, ties into something that we'll be talking about just a little bit later tonight.
Okay, in that message that we kind of had a little conversation there after we received that request, and I asked if there were any specific creatures that this listener would like to know more about. So we're going to do a little bit of a teaser, and interestingly enough, it ties in a little bit with our next conversation about fairies. here in just a minute. We're going to talk about the Awizodal.
Yeah, the Awizodal is a bizarre little creature, described by some as being small, like a small dog with pointy ears, and described by others as being like a large, almost like a sea serpent at the edge of the lake.
Yeah, what's interesting about that creature, you said it's described as dog-like. It's also known to be waterproof, which I found to be awesome.
Its fur is waterproof and clumped up in spikes. So you have this image of a spiky dog creature that lives in the water for some reason. But what's special about it is its hands are kind of like human hands, where it can manipulate its fingers and everything. And at the very edge of its long tail is another human hand. And what these guys will do is they'll wait for somebody to get close to the edge of the water, or they'll sneak up on fishermen and they'll grab people with that extra hand and they'll drag them into the water. Very similar to the Kelpie of Irish lore. And then they'll eat them. Now, the thing that really caught me about this monster is they enjoy the crunchy parts of the human body. So they like the
yummy,
the teeth and the fingernails, which really just
drives you crazy.
Yeah. They also like the eye. They consider that to be a favorite part, but just the thought of them eating teeth or like favoring the chewing of teeth, just nah. That's okay. The reason that we talked about them being relevant to tonight is there is a creature called the Kushi. The Kushi is kind of... It does something that the Banshee does in kidnapping people, but it's a spiky green fairy dog. Kind of similar to the Awizodal. You have both of these spiky dog things that kind of kidnap people, and one drags them down to eat them under the sea. The Kushi will actually kidnap them to take them back to Fairyland or the other
world or whatever. Yeah.
So it's kind of an interesting archetype to find and see through our Monster Mailbag this week.
Point of interest, there was a movie not too many years ago that absolutely everybody loved.
I feel like you're trying to be sarcastic about that.
Everybody loved this movie, The Lady in the Water.
I actually liked it. Okay.
Yeah, I did not think it was as bad as everybody made it out to be. It was just strange. It was weird. It was one of his...
It was quirky.
It was one of his more quirky moments, but remember that dog in that movie?
I do. The
representative of the Kushi.
Yeah, it is, actually. Now that you mention it, both are green and spiky, have, fur like grass.
So if you want to get a little picture of the Kushi, go watch that movie, enjoy it again. Also, a little bit of similarities there with the Awizodal.
Yes, definitely with the whole dragging away and eating part as well.
So the Awizodal, a little teaser there of Mesoamerican creatures, a spiky dog, waterproof, which I still just fascinates me completely that we have a waterproof dog. I love it. And he loves the crunchy parts of the human body. We'll get more into Mesoamerican legends and creatures in the near future, and we'll pair them possibly with some of our discussions on Native American lore. Really looking forward to that. But thank you so much for writing in and hanging out with us on Twitter. We love to hear from you, and we'll definitely be getting into these monsters. Going to be a lot of fun when we do. So let's get back to our regular scheduled program. Okay, Michael, that was cool to hear from another listener. Always love that. We're going to go into our third and final Women of the Mound.
The Bavanshi.
The Bavanshi. I love saying that. It's just Bavanshi.
Yeah, it sounds like a vampire.
It sounds like a vampire, but it also sounds like maybe a croissant or something. A Bavanshi.
No, I'm hungry.
What would you like for... I would like a Bavanshi. What is a Bavanshi?
A Bavanshi.
Well, you're not going to eat a Bavanshi.
No,
she's going to eat you.
Yes.
So
and this one is not the dainty pinprick on the neck.
No.
And she's not the light and emotional, sappy Leanan she either.
No. No muse here.
We've talked about the Bavanshi as well, just in passing on our vampire podcast. that episode that we did on vampires.
Right.
But the Banshee is a woman who usually comes back because of some great injustice done to her in life. The story that we told before was she was kind of married off against her will. It was not the man that she loved, but it was a feudal chieftain who was kind of abusive. He locked her in a tower, let her starve to death, and she came back and ate him. So
she had none of that.
She did not. Well, she had him.
She had him for sure.
The Banshee appears in other stories as well. Typically, she appears in either green or white. She'll come to you at night and kind of seduce you on the lonely roads. And if you fall for her, she'll just dig into your neck, basically, and drink your blood, and then she'll eat the rest of you. This is not something that she's going to turn you into a vampire in the romantic way.
There's no romance here.
There's no. She's going to rip you to shreds.
There's no bite in my neck, oh, that feels good, I have chills, now I'm a vampire. No, it's, oh my god, and you're dead, and you're gone, and then you're eaten.
Then there is one story...
And your memory is wiped off the earth.
Brutally. There is one story of a group of 4 young men in old Ireland that were, out traveling, and they found this abandoned house that they stopped in for the night. And there were 3 young women that appeared on the doorstep. They were dressed in white, and they were lost and alone and afraid and hungry, I guess. And so they asked if they could also spend the night in the abandoned house just for shelter. Well, they were invited in. Danger there, inviting a vampire in. And
dumbass.
To the surprise of the young men, one pulled out an instrument and started playing. The other 2 started dancing. Now, what happened next is, as the young men were entranced, they started to devour them. They jumped on. They didn't wait for anything. They just, started to eat the people.
Because there's no romance here.
No, there's not.
Folks.
This is the scene in Cabin in the Woods when the guys with the knives start coming out. But that 4th guy did actually escape because he happened to pick up like a piece of iron that was in the house and ward them off. Now, fairies do not like certain substances, and iron is probably among the biggest, holy relic against them.
Yep, iron, fire.
Mm-hmm. Well, the idea is cold iron is almost like a crucifix to them, or holy water would be to a vampire. So he was able to get away.
Repulsive, poisonous almost.
Painful. There's another instance of the being able to get away from them. I don't think a cross would do much for you against the Banshee. Holy water probably wouldn't do anything.
Yeah, not so much.
Actually, holy water might. I remember some stories of changelings being burned by holy water, so that might actually be good to carry around on you.
By holy water or by the boiled water?
I'll have to go back and read that
story.
We'll
go
again.
back and read that story. Because I do remember the story of the changeling with the boiling water and the eggshells and all that kind of stuff, but I don't remember any priest blessing it or anything.
Yeah, so here's the...
No romance here.
Not with eggshells, no. Now, there's an interesting tidbit to Banshees that set them apart from other vampires across the world, and really, it ties them into some fairies, but it is kind of a strange aspect. Their feet are said to be the feet of a stag. Mm-hmm. So they'll hide their weird feet so that people don't find them out. If you're able to catch a glimpse of their feet, then they'll actually run away because, the game is up. But that's something to note. We were talking about on the Monster Mailbag, the deer people. Mm-hmm. The deer woman is something that is actually native to Oklahoma. And it's kind of the same story of this woman with deer feet that is kind of an emotional vampire at times, and sometimes a blood-sucking creature. But that's a creature for another podcast.
Right.
But something I will point out about the Banshee, having the feet of a stag, the devil in Irish folklore sometimes appears as a white stag. In fact, several witch trials of the time, unfortunately, probably not good trials. In one trial,
I don't see many witch trials throughout history being good or well-founded.
But in one of those trials, he is described as being a white stag, and as well as being appearing to that particular person as a beautiful woman, which kind of sounds like the Banshee.
Right.
So there's the tie-in with, again, the devil and the fallen angels. even with the Banshee, you have to have that entrancing moment. She could just rip you to shreds like the story with the feudal chieftain, but most of the time they still have to entrance you with some seductive way, the dancing, the music, the can I please come in because I'm cold and lost and alone, before they just dig into you.
Well, the other part of this is traveling groups. Let me tell you why. Because the beginning of this story, you said that there were 3 women that showed up at the door, and there were 4 guys inside. The reason why that one guy got away, because they were busy with the other 3. So you always want to be the 4th guy out when you're facing Banshee. If they come in 3 and you're in 4s, be the 4th guy and get out.
And how do you be that 4th guy? You just carry that piece of iron on you.
You got to be really smart. You got to know what you're doing. And you got to be willing to walk away from your friends who are being chewed up alive by the Banshee. But listen, that's just my take on it.
That's some zombie apocalypse level.
I'm just laying out the truth here for you about how to escape the Banshee. Travel in packs, 4 or more, and at least be that 4th guy and get out. Because you don't want to be caught with the Banshee once they get inside.
Is it like that internet meme that says, you just need to tie the other person's shoelaces together when the zombie apocalypse happens?
You just need to be able to be the one that can run faster or tie the shoelaces and get away. Well, good discussion tonight on the women of the Faerie Mound. Just kind of opening the door to our month-long discussion on fairies. Very excited about it. Chat it up with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Hang out with us at themonsterguys.com. We'd love to hear from you. Subscribe on iTunes, and if you would, leave us some love there on iTunes. We'd love to hear from you there as well.
Again, congratulations to Carissa. And we hope you enjoy Wayward, and we would love to hear more from the rest of you guys in our Monster Mailbag.
Yeah, very much. Congratulations, Carissa. Very glad to do that for you. All right, everybody. Good night. Have a great week. We'll see you back here in just a couple days for a story podcast. And then next week for the Monster Guys podcast, week 2 of our discussion on fairies. Good night.